So let's talk about what this monster did to become the youngest woman ever put on death row. So on the morning of January 13th, 1995, 19-year-old Colleen Schlemmer was found brutally murdered in Knoxville, Tennessee. Colleen had been brutally murdered by having her head smashed in with a concrete block after suffering almost an hour of torture, which included having a pentagram carved into her chest while she was still alive. Now, Krista was quickly caught a few days later because she actually took a piece of Colleen's skull and kept it as a souvenir and was going around showing all of her friends and bragging about the murder. Now, it was soon discovered that Krista had actually murdered Colleen along with her boyfriend because Krista was jealous and thought that Colleen was trying to steal her boyfriend away from her, even though that was not true in the slightest. Krista was just 19 years old when she was found guilty and sentenced to death, and she is currently still sitting on death row awaiting her execution.
Whatever you do, don't feel bad for this woman. This woman's name is Deborah Jenner. And in 1987, she was convicted of killing her 3-year-old child. And the way she did it is she stabbed her kid more than 70 times with a toy metal airplane. This was one of the most heinous crimes at the time in American history, and she was sentenced to life in prison. And over the years, she applied for parole dozens of times, but was denied every time, until last year, where after 34 years in prison, she was granted parole. Apparently, she was a model inmate when she was in prison. But I'm of the idea that if you commit a crime that heinous, you should never walk around again.
Things Netflix didn't tell you about the Chris Watts case, part 4. Chris Watts actually has a YouTube channel with over 1,000 subscribers. His profile picture is still one of him and Shanann, and weirdly, his only upload is all about saving failing relationships. The speech is over 9 minutes long, and it's really chilling to hear him advise other people on their relationships. At one point, he tells people not to bottle things up because they may come back to bite you. If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive, and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked around her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in. The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her 2 friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges, including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know.
I just found one of the scariest videos from the dark web. The video I'm about to show you is 100% real and it's not for the faint of heart, so if you're triggered easily, I'd skip this one. So, you were warned. Here it is.
Have you heard about this foreign streaming service that people are claiming is like the darkest? I don't know about you, but the scariest TV shows and movies are almost always foreign. And I recently found this Nordic streaming service that was not available in the US. But now it is, and it has some true crime stories that have been like keeping me up at night. Like the story of Lisa Holm, who was a teenager in Sweden working at a cafe when she never made it home one night. She had just texted her father that she was heading home on her moped, but when she never showed up that night, he actually drove to her work and found that her moped was still in the parking lot with the keys in the ignition. And no one inside had seen what happened to her between the entrance to the cafe and her moped. And then when the police are called, they start finding some of her belongings, leading them like breadcrumbs to this shed up here. And that's where they ultimately find Lisa's body crammed into a locker. And this is the crazy part, but beforehand, there was a guy in the search party looking for Lisa who was telling volunteers beforehand to not look in this specific shed. So the police think that there's something weird with this guy, so they bring him in for questioning, and during the investigation, they find thousands of images and videos on his computer of like extreme violence against women. His name was Nergis Belavicius, and he was eventually convicted of Lisa's murder. And this was actually an episode in Crime Scene Sweden, which is a show about murders that just wrecked the country. There's tons of other shows I haven't heard of that I'm actually really digging, so I'm gonna include a link in my bio for you to check it out, and let me know what you watch.
Netflix is begging Alec Murdaugh to do a jailhouse interview for the documentary Murdaugh Murders, A Southern Scandal. Producer Mike Gasparo said, "We feel at this point it is very important to have your voice in the remainder of our series." He also said the first 3 episodes were viewed by 40 million households, and also 75 million hours were watched in just 10 days. He also told Alec those numbers will continue to rise, and said that we believe you can have the largest platform on TV if you are willing to speak to us. It isn't known yet if Alec has agreed to take part in the series, but make sure you like this video, follow for more, and subscribe.
It's another rainy day in the South. Go out and be someone's sunshine today.
This woman is a prime example of how easily you can deceive people on your social media. This is Farron Jill Hudson, 35 years old, from Alabama. And the story starts in 2021 when her husband was arrested on 5 counts of possessing obscene material with a child under the age of 17. Later that year, he was rearrested for 76 counts of possession of child porn. Now, at the time, he claimed that police had planted these images on his phone, these videos, and there was an investigation undertaken. But when police investigated James's phone, they found evidence that linked his wife, Jill, to these crimes. Yes, Jill, the happy-go-lucky TikToker talking about God and sunshine. So after this new evidence came to light, new charges were added and Jill was arrested. And these new charges included incest, essay of a child, and production of obscene materials with a child under the age of 17. So during her interrogation, after she was arrested, Jill was shown a still image from one of these child porn videos that she allegedly helped to produce. And she confirmed to detectives and investigators that indeed it was her and another child in that video. Apparently, Jill confirmed that it was her in the video performing an obscene act with a child. But after she was arrested, Jill was stupid enough to call a family member, and on the phone call from jail, she asked her family member to go check her devices and destroy evidence. So obviously authorities were listening into that phone call. They were able to get search warrants for all of her other electronics, and they're undergoing a search of her property right now. It's just wild. You wouldn't imagine that that woman who posted that video would be accused of doing such horrific things with children. And it just goes to show that these predators are everywhere, so we have to stay vigilant and keep our children safe. That should be our #1 priority in this nation.
This photo is not at all what it first appears to be. Part 10. This just looks like a selfie, but it was actually used to solve a murder. It was taken on May 24th, 2015. That is Cheyenne Antoine, and that is Brittany Gargol. And the next day, Brittany's body would be found on the outskirts of Saskatoon, Canada. She died by strangulation by a belt that was found at the scene. And police were able to link that belt to the killer because she's wearing it in this photo.
Pictures that seem innocent but are actually terrifying. At first glance, this image behind me seems to depict nothing more than a happy adventurer waving hello to the photographer who has decided to take his picture. However, the adventurer in question is a man by the name of Christopher McCandless, who in 1992 decided to pursue a nomadic lifestyle by venturing alone into the Alaskan wilderness in an attempt to live off the land. Unfortunately, Christopher wasn't experienced enough for such a difficult survival task, and he ended up starving to death just a few months later in an abandoned bus he had turned into a makeshift shelter. Near the time of his death, Christopher took this final picture of himself. The note he is holding reads, "I have had a happy life, and thank the Lord. Goodbye, and may God bless all." Like this video if you want this series to continue, and follow for more.
Okay, so I saw another creator post about this house on Zillow, and I want to show you guys how creepy this house is. So this home is located in Ohio. It's going for $600,000, 5-bedroom, and 6-bath. So at first, when you look through the photos, it looks like a completely normal home, very nice. This is what the kitchen area looks like, and it looks really nice. It looks like it was just renovated. Then you get to the bedroom part, and it shows this. There's a bed on the floor, well, a mattress on the floor, and this light thing. I don't know what's going on. Then it goes to another bedroom, what I'm assuming is a girl's bedroom, pink. Nothing out of the ordinary there, just like a simple room. Then this is another bedroom, seems normal, doesn't seem anything out of the ordinary. Then this is what I'm assuming is the master bedroom. And again, another creepy room with a mattress on the floor that's stained. And this, like, what is that? After looking at it, I realized that it's for a little movie room with like a projector, but still, it is like so creepy. Then we get to this part of the house and it just says party, so it's kind of looking like a party room, right? Then once they take more photos of it, it literally looks like a bar slash club. So maybe for someone who wants to have their friends over, they don't have to go out, they already have this at their home. And in that same area, they have a bathroom, so nasty, and they have this part of it as well. It's just weird and strange. And in that same area, they literally have a stripper pole. I don't know. Then this is what the outside area looks like if you were to go in the backyard. I've watched enough true crime to know this is not normal. In that backyard, they also have this. I have no idea what it is, like a shed. It looks so creepy. This whole house, it like, when you first look at it, it looks so nice. And then once you go into some of the bedrooms, you're like, what's going on here? And I don't know. I really don't know what's going on here.
July 29th, 2019, 45-year-old Colin Dowler was biking down some logging trails on a mountain in British Columbia. As he came around the corner of one of these trails, he saw off in front of him about 100 feet, there was a 350-pound male grizzly bear looking directly at him, and then it started walking towards him. So Colin weighs his options. He's not armed except for a small pocket knife with like a 2.5-inch blade, and that's it. So he decides he's not going to run, he's not going to try and get around it, he's going to stand his ground. So he gets off his bike, puts the bike in between him and the bear, and just begins talking to the bear. Now the bear walks all the way up right next to him and begins to pass him, and Colin is relieved. But as soon as the bear does pass him, it wheels around and tries to get behind Colin. So Colin, he takes his bike, he rips it around, puts it between him and the bear again, and he actually says to the bear, he goes, "Hey man, I know I'm in your territory, we don't have to do this." But this does nothing to deter the bear. So Colin, he grabs his backpack, which is full of food, and he throws it to try and distract the bear. It does not distract the bear. So he takes out his hiking pole and he puts it on the bear's forehead to try and push the bear back. This doesn't work. The bear just grabs the pole and rips it out of his hands. And by this point, the bear is now taking powerful swipes at Colin's bike. So not knowing what else to do, Colin just takes his bike and he just throws it at the bear. But the bear just immediately charges over the bike and it grabs Colin by the midsection in its mouth, right under the ribs on the left side. It lifts him up in the air and it just runs with Colin in its mouth like 40 or 50 feet off near a ditch where it slams him to the ground and then it jumps on top of him, pinning Colin to the ground with his body. Now Colin is trying to gouge its eyes out. This isn't working. He grabs its cheek, like its lips, and he's trying to like peel its lips back. This isn't doing anything. And then Colin realizes he's about to die a horrible death. He's looking down. He can see his side is ripped open. His kidney is showing. He can hear the bear's teeth grating against his femur bone as the bear is basically attempting to eat his thigh while he's alive. And Colin at this point just basically is thinking of his wife and his children and resigned to the fact he's about to die a horrible death when he remembers that 2.5-inch pocket knife he's got, and he knows it's his last shot. So he reaches in, he grabs it, and he jams it as hard as he can into this bear's neck. There's a gout of blood that washes over Colin out of the bear's neck, and the bear immediately lets go and just walks away. So Colin, not even able to believe that that just worked, he cuts himself a tourniquet, he tourniquets his leg, he bikes down to a logging camp where 5 loggers give him medical aid, they call him medevac, he's taken to a hospital, he is given immediate surgery, and doctors are able to save his life, and he would eventually make a near full recovery. He beat a grizzly bear with a pocket knife.
A man was in a cemetery in Serbia when all of a sudden he started hearing strange sounds coming from inside a grave, and this is what he captured on camera. Check this out.
Gospode Bože, kakvi su ovo zvuci? Je li realno ovo? Kuku, gospode, ovo je horor. Horor, trauma, brate mili, trauma.
That same week, he went home, and while refurbishing his home, he found a very strange object. And this is what he found.
Nije slučajno. Koliko je rekao od vrata? 1,20 m ispred ulaznih vrata od kuće. Vidi da nije ništa slučajno. Što imamo tkanina crna. Pa su idioti stavili unutra. Neki papirić.
He found a piece of paper, some hair, and while doing all of this, he felt this was some sort of black magic or some sort of curse. This is what he found. Check this out. Really creepy. Now.
Malo mi je gadno što diram. Evo. I kako je moguće da čovjek potrefi? Evo.
Imagine a husband murdering his wife to produce a horror film. In the early 2000s, low-budget documentary-styled horror movies were super in. Movies such as The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity were prime examples of how profitable and popular these movies could get to be. A computer technician named Blaine Norris wanted to cash in on this opportunity. So he partnered with his co-worker Brian Trimble to create a low-budget horror movie. They named it Through Hike, a ghost story. Blaine quickly realized that he didn't have the money nor the equipment to produce such a film. But this is when Brian came in and saved the day by offering to be the cameraman and allowing Blaine to use his camera equipment. They even ended up receiving an $18,000 investment towards the movie. After the investment was given to them, they started casting the crew to proceed with producing the film, but then things went sideways. The first problem they faced was the fact that Brian had multiple sclerosis and that it ended up flaring up so bad within the time that he was not able to walk around with all the equipment or through the hikes that they had to have gone through to film the movie. Shortly after, the investor ended up pulling back his money. And this is when Blaine decided to put everything on his credit cards, but he soon realized that he was in an extreme debt, and no matter how much debt he put himself under, he wasn't going to have enough to produce the film. And this is when the awful Brian came up with a horrific plan. Because of his multiple sclerosis diagnosis, his wife Randy took over the home and worked 2 jobs to keep the house afloat. But this wasn't enough, right? When Brian came up with the idea of participating in the movie and putting up $5,000, Randy said no. All of a sudden, she was the bad guy in the situation. So this is when Brian approached Blaine, asking him to unalive his wife in exchange for $20,000 that he would be getting from the life insurance.
Blaine could make his movie and Brian would get exactly what he wanted, more money and not having to deal with his wife. Randy's life insurance was set up for $100,000. On January 10th, 2003, Randy was at work all day while her husband Brian stated that he was going to go out to eat with a friend so he would have a solid alibi. Blaine, on the other hand, was in the Trimble's garage waiting for Randy to get home, as planned by the two of them prior to this. Trigger warning for the graphic content preceding this. Upon arriving, Randy parked into the garage and got out of her vehicle. This is when Blaine pinned her down, trying to strangle her. She would pass out, but she wouldn't die right away. This is when Blaine took out a knife and stabbed her over 26 times. Why? He then proceeded to slit her throat.
Welcome to Dre's True Crime Stories, and this is the case of the Maguindanao massacre. Trigger warning, viewer discretion is advised. The Ampatuans have taken control of Maguindanao since the family patriarch Andal Ampatuan Sr. was elected governor back in 1998. Before securing the gubernatorial post, he served as mayor for 10 years. He was elected 2 more times as governor with no opposition. Unable to run for another term, he groomed his son Andal Jr. to take his place to run for governor in 2010. For years, they were unopposed until Vice Mayor Ismael Maguindanao decided to challenge the Ampatuans. He made plans to run against Andal Jr. on the upcoming 2010 polls. This did not sit well with the Ampatuans, and they made sure that Ismael knew their displeasure by sending him death threats. Allegedly, he was told that they were going to chop him into pieces if he files his certificate of candidacy. So on November 29, 2009, instead of filing his paperwork himself, Ismael had his wife Jeneline file it for him, believing that no one would harm a pregnant woman. To ensure her protection, he also invited members of the media and family members to accompany his spouse. At about 5 p.m., a convoy of 6 vehicles left Buluan and headed out to Sharif Aguac, where the Commission on Elections office was located. There was a 7th vehicle that lagged behind. Tailing right behind the 6 vehicles were 2 vehicles that were not part of the convoy. One of them was bound for a hospital after one of the passengers suffered a mild stroke, and the other vehicle just happened to be taking the same road. Before reaching the Comelec office, the convoy was stopped by armed men and ordered them to drive to another location. Upon reaching the location, 3 mass graves and a backhoe awaits them. The armed men shot the members of the convoy with rifles. The women were reported to have been sexually assaulted and mutilated before killing them. A total of 58 people were killed. 3 of them were journalists and 6 of them were civilians who were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. Jeneline was not spared and was killed with her unborn child. The bodies and the vehicles were then dumped into mass graves with the same backhoe used to dig them. So apparently whoever planned this mass murder did not make any plans on how to clean this up. There was so much evidence left, I'm not even sure what they're thinking. The hired men were not able to bury all the victims, as a helicopter was spotted in the area. The backhoe that they used has the governor's name on it. News reports about the incident sparked nationwide outrage. 3 days after the incident, Andal Jr. turned himself in, but he claimed that the Moro Islamic Liberation Front perpetrated the killings. Due to the magnitude of the attack, the number of victims and suspects involved, and key witnesses getting assassinated while the case was still ongoing, it took years before the Ampatuans were brought to justice. On December 19, 2019, Andal Ampatuan Jr. and Zaldi Ampatuan were charged with 57 counts of murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. 28 other suspects were found guilty of the same charge and was sentenced to 40 years. 15 were charged as an accessory to the crime and will serve 6 to 10 years, and the remaining 55 were found not guilty. The patriarch Andal Sr. died 4 years before the sentences were given. This incident was considered to be the single deadliest event for journalists in history, as most of the casualties were journalists.